Hello everyone. So today we'll move on to Proverbs chapter 5, and today is my last pre-talk for Maureen's memoirs, so you won't have to hear my voice again, lucky for you guys. So just a quick recap on the past 3 weeks. So what we've seen in the previous chapters is a father instructing his son on how to gain wisdom and the pursuit of this wisdom. And he's giving his son many instructions and guidance on how to live a godly life and how to make good decisions. And these are words of encouragement that can be applied to our lives. So in this chapter, Solomon, he's teaching his son about foolishness and sin. But today I'm just going to be focusing on verses 21 to 23, so the last 3 verses of the chapter. So if we could just get that up on the screen, if someone could read that, please.
Men are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entraps the wicked man, and he is caught in the cause of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray.
So basically what that means in simple terms is that the Lord sees everything you do. Wherever you go, he's watching. The sins of the wicked, they're a trap, and they get caught in the net of their own sin. So here in verse 21, it states that the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord. So God, he's watching over the choices we make. And there are 2 paths that are set before us. And we're given the opportunity to choose which path that we will align with. God, he doesn't force us down one specific direction or the other. He sets before us life, and then evil sets before us death. And there are only 2 paths that we can choose from. Instead, God watches all man's paths. He observes, and like an affectionate father, he's paying attention, influencing, but he's allowing the child to make their own decisions. And I'm sure for lots of us, the older we get, our parents, they let us start making our own decisions for ourselves so that we can experience and we can learn. God, he knows the ways of men, but why do you think he's giving us this instruction? God, he sees everything we think, and he sees everything we do. He knows what we're doing and where we're going. And he gives us this instruction to stop us from making bad decisions and bad judgments. So if we would just listen to God and do what he says, life would be so much more easier. So verses 22 to 23, they kind of talk about the idea of foolishness and sin, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today. We all know that sin it's a bad thing. And these verses remind us something else about sin, that sin is foolishness. And like, for example, Adam and Eve's first sin. They thought, hey, let's eat from the fruit that God told us not to eat from. Why? Well, at that time, they would say things that sound wise and that, it's pleasing to the eye or it's desirable for gaining wisdom. But as soon as they ate from the fruit, they knew how foolish they had been. Again, sin is foolishness. And isn't it the same for all of us, though? If you think of a sin that you have committed, think of a time when you broke God's commandment. And ask yourself now, was that wise to do? Was it smart? Maybe it seemed like a good idea at the time, but again, sin is foolishness. And it's kind of a really scary thought that sin is foolishness and that you can't outsmart it. The devil, he's so devious, and he loves it when we do the wrong things because we're going against God. And the devil, he wants to drag us away from God. But we as humans, we can't really see it because we're too foolish. But God sees it, like it said in verse 21, for the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. So what does God do with this sin when he sees it? He becomes human, and he dies. And God taught us through the cross, through his death on the cross, that Jesus has conquered the sin of every person who has ever lived. Jesus took our sin away. And we know this because it's revealed to us through the Bible. From when we were infants, we've known and we've learnt the Bible, which is able to make us wise for salvation through Jesus. And us humans who are sinful fools are now wise for salvation. We are new people, wise people who can see the foolishness of our sin and the wisdom of God's saving plan. So as new people in Jesus, full of wisdom, look at the things in your life with these new eyes that he's given you. Look at your sin the way he does. It's foolishness. And since all human beings' ways are foolish, if we allow God to guide us in the way of the cross and the way of wisdom. So again, Solomon, he warned forfeiting one's life to the forces of evil. And the natural order of things is for us to experience the consequences of our choices. If we give ourselves to our iniquities, they will capture us. Our sin will become our shackle. And if you don't know what shackle is, it's like a chain that's used to like fasten like prisoners' wrists or ankles. And that's kind of like what sin is. It's stuck to us. And Solomon adds that he will be held in the cords of his sin. Choosing the path of the wicked will leave us entangled. And St. Paul also notes this principle in Romans, asking the question to the believers, having been freed from the slavery of sin, why in the world would you go back into it? Don't you want to be free? So sin's consequences, they eventually choke the life out of a person. Like it mentions in verse 23, he will die for the lack of instruction. So it's not the wickedness of the sin itself at the root of destruction, but the influence of his iniquity that blots out his ability to receive this instruction. So if we give ourselves over to sin, we lose our ability to even recognize how to escape. And often used in the book of Proverbs is a synonym for wisdom, which is the word instruction. And this is how one learns, improves, and receives and gets guidance. And the tangled mess of sin is what makes this instruction harder to receive. Because sin, it dulls our ability to recognize its benefit. And Solomon, he ends the chapter with a sorrowful statement in verse 23. In the greatness of his folly, he will go astray. So the sinner gets lost in the forest of iniquity, and he strays to a path that is not best for him and not in alignment with the true purpose for which God has created him for. His folly becomes so great that he can no longer see the true way. So we have to remember that God, he's watching over this and he's observing. With the heartbreak of a father, the poor choices and the tragic entanglements of sin, in all this, Solomon is emphasizing this ability of humans to make their own choices. And it's a vital responsibility with immense consequences for ourselves in this life as well as the next. So don't be foolish in your sin and follow Christ and the teachings of the Bible in order for you to be wise and live a good Christian life. Glory be to God forever. Amen.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Such a wonderful series on the book of Proverbs. We really appreciate it, and great series on the pre-talk, so thank you very much. To continue on with the night, we have the main Bible chapter that we're going through. So today we're going through Exodus chapter 2 with Marc Bastawrous. So Marc, whenever you're ready, you're more than welcome. Thank you.
All right, name of Father, Son, Spirit, God, amen. If we could just take 30 seconds of silent prayer just to pray that we receive a message from the Bible study tonight. All right, name of Father, Son, Spirit, God, amen. So we're studying Exodus chapter 2 today, but before we get into the chapter, because there's a little bit to unpack, I just thought I'd quickly do a quick overview of what happened in Exodus chapter 1. But you guys were here last week, God willing, so if someone wants to just quickly summarize what's happened so far. It's only one chapter. So does anyone want to just give me a quick summary? Everyone stop making eye contact with me. No? All right, so essentially, at the end of the book of Genesis, there's this period of like grace for the Israelites. Joseph has rose to power in Egypt, and as a result, he's brought his family over to Egypt during the time of the famine so that they can live in peace. And then after many years and a few generations have passed, the book of Exodus begins with a new king who rose to power who doesn't know who Joseph is, doesn't know his significance. And so he's intimidated by the number of Israelites that they were. Concerned that maybe one day they're going to want to take over, they're going to want to conquer us, and so maybe we should do something about them now. Let's deal with them now. And so he set taskmasters over them to give them really hard jobs to do. Okay? And yet they continue to grow. And so what he does, he decides this isn't enough, this isn't slowing them down, they're still growing. And so he declares a decree and instructs all the midwives, the Egyptian midwives, to kill all newborn males. Okay, so he says to them, if the newborn is a female, they shall live. If they're a male, you shall kill them. Okay, and the one verse that I wanted to just speak about really briefly from chapter 1 was from verse 17, which says, "But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive." Saved the male children alive. And the reason I wanted to focus just on that verse is because what we'll see in chapters 1 and 2 is that there are all these little minor characters in the book of Exodus that get overlooked. They get overlooked because the book of Exodus is the pinnacle moment in the history of Israel. That moment when Christ delivers them and allows them to pass through the Red Sea. That is what is remembered from that moment all the way up until the coming of Christ. It's the pinnacle moment in their history. And so a lot of things get overlooked in the book of Exodus, specifically in chapters 1 and 2, all these little minor characters, 3 of which we'll speak about in today's chapter. But these midwives, because they feared God, they had enough courage to say, no, this isn't what we're going to do. And so they lied to Pharaoh, they rejected his command, and it says that God dealt well with them. Because they didn't seek to please God, they didn't seek to please people, they sought only to please God. Okay? And so we come to chapter 2. And the reason, like I said, I really like chapters 1 and 2 is because it sets the scene for what's to come. Like I said, it's the pinnacle moment in the history of Israel, that moment when they passed through the Red Sea. Okay, it's the thing that keeps them going in the wilderness. It's the thing that keeps them going when they're in captivity. The promise that a new Exodus would come, a new Moses would rise up. It's the thing that keeps them going through all their trials. But chapters 1 and 2, like I said, it sets the scene. It sets the scene, and it gets so easily overlooked. So I'm actually really excited to be going through this one with you guys today. So we'll just read verses 1 to 4. Oh, and the other thing as well, when we read the Bible, I actually I'm not one of those people that get offended if you guys want to sleep when I'm talking. But when we read the Bible, just please try and pay attention, because like I said, there are some beautiful characters and some really beautiful things that happen in this chapter, and it's what will benefit. We'll benefit more from the Bible than anything I could say. So we'll just start by reading verses 1 to 4. "And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him." The reason I'm stopping here is because typically when we think of Moses' mother saving him, I don't know if anyone's like me, but if you're like me, you picture the scene from Prince of Egypt. Did anyone know Prince of Egypt? The scene where she puts the baby in the river, and then she pushes the river, puts the baby in the basket, puts the basket in the river, and then pushes the basket out into the river. And then she starts singing a really nice song and waves goodbye to Moses. And then you see Moses goes through the crocodiles and the ship and somehow manages to survive, and he ends up at the door of Pharaoh's daughter's house. That's not how this actually looks. If you can see, there's a very particular way that she sets everything up. She puts the baby in an ark of bulrushes, which is like the basket. She daubs it with asphalt and pitch, and she puts the child in it, and then she lays it by the reeds, which, if you've seen them at riverbanks, reeds are quite long. Okay, she puts it by the reeds in a place where the basket won't actually move. She just laid it there. Her intention may have been to just hide the baby by the river. That could have been her intention. She may have intended for someone to find the baby. But again, that holds a risk all on its own. But she wasn't pushing her baby out into the river. She was doing something practical. Okay? Could we say, with the level of faith that she had, could we say that had she pushed it out into the river and prayed, could we say that Moses would be saved? Yeah. Possibly. But when there is something that we can do, we have to do it. When there is an opportunity to be practical, we need to do it. Okay? A relationship with God needs to be synergistic. St. Augustine says, we pray as though it all depends on God, but we work as though it all depends on me. So whenever there's an opportunity to do something, whenever there's an opportunity to actually work and be practical, I need to put it in. If I've got an exam, it's not enough to say, God, this one's yours. Throw the basket in the water, push it out. God, it's on you. I need to study. If I've got a job interview, it's the same thing. I have to prepare. But I prepare as though it all depends on me, and I pray as though it all depends on God. Like I said, of course, prayer is the vital component to this miracle that we're about to see, and to many miracles in our lives, regardless of our work. It's a vital component. We were visiting America with a few friends. We were just on a holiday, and we took caravans. We hired out 3 caravans, and we drove down from like San Francisco to LA. And because we hired out these caravans, we needed to fill them with things that we can sleep with. So we bought pillows and blankets and stuff so that we could sleep in the caravans comfortably. But then when we got to LA, we got all these pillows and blankets. What are we going to do? We had 17 guys, so we had 17 pillows and blankets. What are we going to do with them? We can't take them back with us to Australia. We're not going to just leave them on the side of the road. Let's do something with them. And one of the boys suggested, there's a lot of homeless people in downtown LA. Why don't we go out and give them the pillows and blankets? So we did that. We walked around, and we would ask them for their name. We would tell them we're Christians. We would ask them if they wanted us to pray for anything in particular, and then we would ask them if they wanted a pillow and a blanket. And most people, they'd tell us their name, give us a prayer, and ask for a pillow and blanket. And as we're walking around, we see a homeless man sleeping on the ground, and so we leave. We didn't want to bother him. We just left a pillow and a blanket for him. And then right next to him, there's a shop, and on the shop there was an advertisement for like some, I don't know, surfing shirt or whatever, and the shirt said, "What is prayer going to do?" And I remember getting so mad. I'm like, oh man, look at all these, these heathens, they don't recognize the power of prayer, and I'm getting angry, and I don't know why I got angry. I didn't care that much, but one of my friends was like, but we say the same thing. What is prayer going to do? If there's an opportunity for us to do something, prayer alone is going to do nothing. If there's something for us to do, we have to do it. If we had all these pillows and blankets and we threw it out and just prayed that these homeless people would sleep well at night, we're not being true Christians. We're not doing what we're called to do. In James it says, if a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? What does it profit if I tell someone that's hungry, be filled, I'll be praying for you, when I've got food in my hands, when I've got an opportunity to give him something? So, no, the scene is not, she put him in the basket and pushed the basket out into the river, but she put him in a way where he could potentially be saved, in a practical way. We'll read verses 5 to 6. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So our first minor character in Exodus chapter 2 was Moses' mother, whose faith and practicality saved him. Our second minor character is Pharaoh's daughter. And what was it that prompted her to save this child? Because she obviously knows her dad's decree. She knew this was one of the Hebrews' children. It's not like this was a random child. It's not like she couldn't discern the difference between a Hebrew and an Egyptian child. She knew this was one of the Hebrews' children. So what prompted her to have pity on him? It says, when she saw the baby wept, she had compassion on him. She had compassion on him. And that is the point that I wanted to focus on. That's the virtue I wanted to focus on when it comes to Pharaoh's daughter. The word compassion comes from the Latin word compati. Com meaning with, and pati, which means to suffer. Okay? So compassion means to suffer with. Means to suffer with. Like I said, this would have been very dangerous for Pharaoh's daughter, knowing her dad's decree. If she was to come and protect this child, knowing what if her dad is willing to kill newborn male children, there's no guessing what he would have done to her. And yet she saw the baby weeping and she had compassion. She saw the baby weeping and she thought to herself that she is willing to take on that burden. Okay? It's nice to show sympathy to people that are suffering. But sympathy is just, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you're going through what you're going through. Compassion takes it to the next level. That empathy, that I'm with you in what you're going through. I want to share in your burdens. Okay? And so we need to be sensitive to the needs of others. And when we're sensitive to the needs of others, we invite peace into our own lives. We invite peace because I'll never regret sharing someone's burden. I'll never have any guilt when I share in someone's suffering. It invites peace into my life. There's a really nice book on compassion. I actually forget the name, but I remember writing down this quote, which says, "Compassion is sometimes the fatal capacity for feeling what it is like to live inside somebody else's skin. It is the knowledge that there can never really be any peace and joy for me until there is peace and joy finally for you too." When I have compassion for someone, I long for them to be relieved of their suffering. I share in their suffering so that I can help ease that burden. I suffer with them. We only need to do something small. We only need to be sensitive to the needs of others in small ways. We're not asked to do anything grand in our lives. We might be called one day, but it starts in the small things. I was recently telling a friend, my least favorite question now in day-to-day life is, how you going? It's it's an Aussie thing because, you walk past someone and you say, how you going? How you going? No one actually cares. How you going? Yeah, good. How are you? I'm good. What are you up to? Not much. We're not chatting on MSN. We're real people with real problems. And if I really care to know how someone is going, then I need to ask deeper questions. Especially with my friends, Don't just leave it there, how you going? Yeah, good. No, how you going? How's work? How's the family? Is there anything that you're going through that you want to talk about? Whatever it is, it's not weird to just be real with your friends and to try and be more sensitive to their needs. Mother Teresa says we cannot always do great things on this earth. We can only do small things with great love. If I have great love for someone, then even the smallest ways, I'll show them that I care. In the smallest ways, I want to show them that I'm sensitive to their needs. I want to show them that if they're going through any kind of suffering, that I'm going to be with them. Okay, that I'm going to share that burden with them. Like Pharaoh's daughter. We'll read verse 7. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, so this is Moses' sister, who we know was watching this whole thing happen. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" So nowadays, it's a lot more straightforward when it comes to nursing your child. A woman gives birth and she nurses the child herself. Back in ancient times, people, especially people of royal status, would hire wet nurses to nurse their children for them. And then once they were fully weaned, they would take them back into their homes, or like they would take them back and care for them themselves. This meant, this opportunity that came around because of Moses' sister meant that Moses would be brought up in a royal household, protected by the royal family, but it also meant that he would still be instilled with the faith of the Israelites. Because as we know, the wet nurse that his sister went and brought, as we read, was his mother. Okay? So Moses was ordained to save the Israelite people. How can we say that? Because he was put in a position where he would be elevated. He would be elevated. He would be considered royalty. He would be respected amongst both the Egyptians and the Israelites. But he would also be put in a position, because his mother was the one who was called, he would be put in a position where he was instilled with the knowledge of God and the knowledge of his people. Okay? And our third minor character, just a quick brief point on her, is Miriam, whose courage orchestrated all this. Whose courage to go and speak to Pharaoh's daughter allowed for this opportunity to occur, allowed for Moses to be put in the prime position to save the people of Israel. So we'll go on and read 8 to 10. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." So like I said, once fully weaned, a wet nurse would then hand the baby back over to the mother. In this case, his adopted mother was Pharaoh's daughter. And something that's incredibly important to pay attention to in the Bible are the choice of names. Okay? In the Bible, when it says specifically the child was named whatever because of this reason, pay attention. Because often it's prophetic in nature, the choice of name. Okay? The word Moses in Hebrew is Moshe, which means to draw out. And in this context, Pharaoh's daughter explicitly means that she drew him out of water. She drew Moses out of water. And this is prophetic of the legacy that Moses would one day leave behind. When he would himself, with obviously God's instruction, he would draw out the people of Israel out of Egypt and lead them through the waters of the Red Sea. Just as Christ saved him when he was a child, saved him by drawing him out of water, Christ would also save him and the people of Israel by drawing them out of the waters of the Red Sea. And so the question for me, I know this is like, why should I be thinking about this? But the question for me, when I read this, and when I read names in the Bible, and when I look at their names in hindsight of the legacy they left behind, is what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind for God? Do I think about the legacy that I'm leaving behind for God? In the Wisdom of Sirach, chapter 41, verse 13, it says, "The days of a good life are numbered, but a good name will remain forever." Our life is short, but if I live that life, I dedicate that life for God, that remains forever. That legacy remains forever. And to leave a legacy behind, I need to do what these three minor characters who we've just spoken about, I need to be able to do what these three minor characters have done and go against the grain. I need to be willing to go against the grain. I need to be courageous enough to go against the grain. I need to have faith like the mother of Moses, faith enough to ignore Pharaoh's decree, faith enough to ignore that, and faith enough to believe that he would be saved if I leave him by the river's bank. Like Pharaoh's daughter, I need to have compassion enough to not worry about what people around me think, but to suffer with others. I need to have courage enough, like Miriam, and approach even, my enemies in a spirit of service, in a spirit of, humility, offering. What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? And like I said, we don't need to do anything great. We don't need to do things, we're not going to part the Red Sea like Moses. We're not going to lead a whole nation out of Egypt. We might not do that. Chances are we won't. But like we said earlier, like Mother Teresa says, we cannot always do great things on earth, but we can only do small things with great love. If that's the legacy I leave behind, then that's a great legacy to leave behind. That I did small things for everyone around me with great love, that I was compassionate, that I was faithful when everything else called to be unfaithful, that I was courageous, that I went against the grain. Before we go on, because we're about halfway through the chapter, does anyone have anything they want to add or say, Mark? It's a good question. I don't know. I have no idea. They must have had their own sort of measure of child development back in ancient times. I imagine when they didn't require nursing anymore. I don't know what the age would have been. But he still would have been a young boy, because we know he grew up in Pharaoh's household. Does anyone else have any comments, anything they like so far from these first 10 verses? All right, if you do think of anything, please, by all means, interrupt. We'll read verse 11. Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. There's a lot of contemplations on Moses as being a type of Christ. Okay? Like Christ was baptized in the river Jordan, Moses too was found and drawn out of a river. Moses left, he leaves, it says he leaves his father, who's Pharaoh, his father's house, to go and see and be with his brethren and share in their burdens. Like Christ leaves his throne to humble himself, to come to us, his brethren, and share in our burdens. But the thing that really strikes me about this is the concept of identity. When we think of Christ, and how did he identify himself? How did Christ identify himself? He did not identify himself with the royalty of the world. He did not identify himself with the kings. He did not identify himself with, the Pharisees, the teachers, those who upheld the law. He did not identify himself with these people of status. Instead, he identified himself with the lowly. In Matthew 25, he speaks about the naked and the sick and the prisoners and all those who are destitute being his brethren. He chose to identify himself with the poor and the needy of the world. And this is the greatest indication of Moses' humility. That Moses, who grew up in a royal household, chose to identify himself as one of his brethren, the Israelites, and share in their burdens. That it says, and he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. He went out to his brethren, the people he knew he belonged to. So the question for us again is, who do I identify with? If I identify myself with Christ, that means I have to care for those that are lowly. I have to care for the poor, the needy, the sick, the strangers, those who are lost, those who are maybe considered outcasts around us. Because if I identify myself with Christ, these are the people that he identifies himself with. Verses 12 to 14. So he looked this way and that way. So he sees one of his brethren being beaten by an Egyptian. And it says he looked this way and that way, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting, and he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" Then he said, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." To fully grasp Moses' actions here, because they seem rash, right? He sees an Egyptian beating one of his brethren, and instead of going in to he's got royal status. Maybe he could have mediated the situation. Instead of doing that, he looks this way, he looks that way, and he kills the Egyptian. Seems very rash, seems very callous. To fully grasp his actions, we need to read St. Stephen's interpretation of these events in Acts chapter 7. So when Stephen was being accused and being tried amongst the Pharisees, he tells them the history of Israel. And when he gets to the story of Moses in chapter 7, he says this: "Now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. For he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand." He supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. So Moses knew that he would be the one to deliver the Israelites from their oppression. Moses knew at 40 years old, which is quite young for someone to think of themselves in that way. At 40 years old, Moses knew he would be the one to deliver the Israelites. He knew he was the person in the best position, being, in Pharaoh's household, being raised amongst the Egyptians of status, but also being an Israelite who was raised and nursed by his own mother, raised with the knowledge of God and the faith and the teachings. But he was rash. That was his mistake. He was rash. It says he looks this way, he looks that way, but he never looks up. He never speaks to God. He never consults God before making this decision. And there's no indication that Moses, at this stage in his life, actually had any relationship with God. There's no indication. I can know everything. I can attend Bible study every Monday night. But I'll find myself never asking God before making a big decision, "God, what do you want me to do?" I make decisions based on my own wisdom or my own knowledge, what I think I know. I make rash decisions. But I never find myself asking God, "What do you want me to do?" And the only way of knowing is by having a genuine relationship with God. If I have a genuine relationship with God, my heart will incline me to make the right decisions. So like I said, there's no indication that Moses had any sort of relationship with God. But what we're about to see is the method that God uses to correct that. Okay? Read verse 15, which says, "When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well." There are 3 stages in Moses' life, and it's easy to discern the difference between these stages because they each span a period of 40 years. The first stage is his first 40 years of life. The 40 years inside Pharaoh's house. It says when he was 40 years old, so we know it ends here. Okay, that's the first stage. And this is like his growing phase. He's growing in the knowledge of Egyptians, but he's also growing in the knowledge of the Israelites and the faith and teachings of the Israelite people. The second stage, which we're about to see, are his 40 years in the land of Midian. And these are his 40 years of separation. These are his 40 years where he is set apart. And the final stage is the third stage, which is his period of service, when he goes back to Egypt and he delivers the Israelites out of the hands of the Egyptians, and they walk 40 years in the wilderness. That's his final 40 years of life. Those are the 3 stages in Moses' life. So if God ordained, we're about to enter the second stage, his period of separation. This lasts 40 years. If God ordained Moses to deliver his people, and Moses is supposed to be the savior of the Israelite people, why does he separate him from Egypt? Why does he set him apart? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. If I'm an Israelite at the time, and I see, all right, there's this Israelite living in Pharaoh's household who understands us, who knows who we are, who considers us his brethren. He's the one that's going to save us. God, is he the one that's going to save us? Yes, Moses is going to save you. All right, where is he? Oh, I sent him about 200 miles that way. But God, that doesn't make sense. Why? If I'm to do anything great for God, and the Bible teaches us this, there needs to be a period of my life where I'm separated, where I'm set apart for his sake. For some people, that's in the most extreme sense. Abraham, who we consider first in faith, what was the first instruction God gave him? Get up, leave your father's house, and leave this land. I want to make you a great nation. I want your descendants to be numbered like the stars in the sky and the sands in the sea. But for me to do that, I need you to leave. I need you to separate. Even St. Paul, tradition tells us that he actually spent, after his conversion, says he goes to Jerusalem, he gets beaten up, but then it says that he goes away, he leaves. And what's he doing that time? Tradition tells us that he actually spent 3 years in the wilderness before returning to Jerusalem, and as we know, changing the whole world. He changed the whole world. But he needed that period of separation. He needed that time where he was set apart. Okay? Because it's in our time of separation where I truly learn to be intimate with God. And for me, that could mean simply separating myself from the distractions of the world. Setting apart a time, which is the bare minimum that I can do. Setting apart a part of my day and telling God, this part of my day is dedicated completely to you. I'm separating myself. No distractions, no phone, no friends, no family, no one. It's me and it's you. I'm separating myself for your sake. To spend it in aloneness with you. That's the bare minimum. That's the bare minimum. And every now and then, I encourage this for everyone, but every now and then, there is benefit in just going on a little retreat. Telling God, I'm going to separate myself from the world, from the distractions that are around me, from work, not from work if you can't. I'm going to separate myself from all these distractions, and I just want to spend alone time with you. Time alone in your presence. Because if I'm going to do anything great for God, there needs to be a period of separation. Moses hadn't yet had that alone time with God. 40 years in the hustle and bustle of Pharaoh's house, doing all the things that royalty do. Yes, he knew who God was. Yes, he knew about the teachings, but he didn't know God. And so God said, if you're going to do anything great for me, you need to be separated. You need to be set apart. So read verse 16 to 22. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. And she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Just 2 things really quickly here, but the first is understanding the importance of a traditional Jewish proposal in ancient times. Okay? It says that he went to this well and they drew water. These Midianite women came, the daughters of a Midianite, and they drew water, and then he went back to their house, and their father gave Zipporah, one of the women at the well, he gave Zipporah to be his wife. And typically, in ancient Jewish times, a Jewish man would meet his spouse by a well. Okay, this was since the time of Isaac. It says that Abraham sent one of his servants to go find a wife for his son Isaac. And where does he find Isaac's wife, Rebekah? By a well. And it was the one who would come and offer him and his camel water. Jacob meets his wife Rachel also by a well. And now we have Moses who meets his wife Zipporah by a well. And so tradition continued that a Jewish man would go and meet his wife by a well. And he would ask her for a drink of water, and that would be his way of proposing to her. If she would give him the water, that would be his way of proposing to her. And by her giving him the water, that would be her way of accepting the proposal. The difference between Moses and these other patriarchs, Israelite patriarchs, is that Moses' wife was a Gentile. She was from Midian. She was also a descendant of Abraham, but not a direct descendant of Israel. She was a Gentile. And so again, following this theme of Moses as being a type of Christ, just as Christ, who meets a Samaritan woman and joins the Israelites and the Gentiles, so too Moses would be the one to bring them together, the Gentiles and the Israelites, and lead them all out of Egypt, lead them all into the Exodus. And Christ would do the same with us, leading us into the new Exodus, through death into life. That's the first thing. Second thing is, it seems that Moses is about to live a very ordinary existence. Moses, who was promised, not promised, but it seems that he knew he would be the one to deliver Israel. All of a sudden, he's about to live a very ordinary life. He's in a foreign land, in Midian. He's now married, finds himself he's married, and now he's got a kid. All right, he's about to live, just typical my wife and kids 9 to 5, like that's what it seems like. He's about to live a very ordinary existence. But we said names are very important in the Bible. And so he names his son Gershom, which essentially means sojourning in a foreign land. Sojourning in a foreign land. Moses is essentially saying, even though you have sent me here, Lord, this is not where I belong. This is not where I'm from. But I am willing to wait until I am called to do something for you. I'm a foreigner in this strange land. This is not where I'm from. This is not where I belong. But I'm willing to wait here as long as you need me to, until you call me to do something for you. And we're the same. We're strangers on this earth. We continually say it in the Mass, that we are sojourners, we are foreigners in this world. Okay? And all we're doing while we're on this earth is awaiting further instructions. We're waiting. If our lives if they are dedicated to Christ, our lives are never meant to remain ordinary. Okay? But we need to be patient if we want to see the plan that God has for us in our lives. In Hebrews chapter 11, it says about Moses and this time in Midian, it says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. He endured these 40 years in a strange land as a foreigner, as someone who didn't belong there. He endured that time because he could see God, and he knew that God had a plan that was extraordinary for him. He wasn't supposed to live this ordinary existence. He knew he didn't belong there, but he was waiting and he endured because he knew that God had a plan for him. So we're the same. We're strangers in this world. We're just waiting for further instructions. But unless we dedicate our lives to God, we'll never live anything more than an ordinary existence for him. So we'll read the final 3 verses. Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. The word remember in the Bible often makes God look bad, because it suggests that maybe he forgot. Right? That's what it seems like when I read it in the English. It suggests that he somehow forgot. God remembered his covenant. He somehow forgot. Did he forget? Can God forget? The word remember in the Hebrew text simply means to act upon. So when it says God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it is essentially saying God acted upon his promise. He's now acting upon his promise. So I have just a few questions. Why did it take him so long? Why did it take him so long to act on this promise? That he would deliver them, that he would make them a great nation. Why did it take him so long? Was God missing all of these years? Was God doing nothing all of this time? And sometimes we feel the same, right? I might be going through a storm in my life, some sort of trial, some sort of tribulation, some kind of suffering. And I think, God, are you missing? Is God missing? Or worse, is God doing nothing in all of this time? The answer to both of those questions is of course not. And there are just two things that I want to say on this point for those of us that might be asking the same questions in our lives. The first is that even though it seems like God was doing nothing, God was preparing salvation for the Israelites, but that preparation was happening 200 miles away in Midian, where Moses was. He was preparing Moses. Remember, Moses was in Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh, who was killing newborn males at the time of Moses' birth. Pharaoh, who was cruel. Pharaoh, who was punishing the Israelites for no reason. And just before Moses left, it said that Pharaoh was furious. Pharaoh was furious. If Moses came back to approach Pharaoh, the one he knew, the one whose house he was raised in, the one he seemingly disobeyed or disappointed, Moses would be killed. There's no way he could return at this time. Not only that, Moses could not have accomplished God's purpose for his life had he not developed a deep relationship with him. So like we said, he needed those years of separation for preparation. He needed to be separated so that God could prepare him for him to accomplish the plan in his life. And in our times of suffering, God's doing the same thing. He's preparing us for something greater. Moses was lost. Moses was alone. He was a foreigner. He was a stranger. But he used that time to prepare him for something greater. Recently, we had a Christian lady who found herself held hostage in the Lint Cafe during the siege in 2014. She came and visited our church. The things that she's a Christian, and she talks about her experience and how she prayed during the whole experience. It's a really beautiful story. It's an amazing story. It's on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. But something that people don't know about her story is that she actually went through severe suffering before being held hostage in the Lint Cafe. Most of us, that's enough suffering for one lifetime. I'm held hostage. That's good enough for me. You're preparing me for something big. I know that. Whatever it is, I'll serve you for the rest of my life. She went through suffering before that. In 2003, 11 years before the Lint Cafe siege, she developed multiple sclerosis, which is a crippling disease that affects the central nervous system, and essentially it takes away all of your mobility very slowly, to the point where many of them become paralyzed very early on in their lives. As a result of her diagnosis, her husband at the time couldn't deal with the pressure of caring for her, knowing that he would have to care for her, and so he divorced her. And through all of that, she remained very resilient. And she says of that period, of that diagnosis, she says, God is preparing me for something greater through this period of suffering. During her time of being diagnosed with MS, God is preparing me for something greater. Okay? And then 10 years later, she finds herself in a Lint Cafe, and now she goes around sharing her experience of faith and hope and perseverance and resilience. Right? God is preparing me. When I'm going through suffering, when I'm going through times of difficulty, when I'm going through any kind of tribulation, God is not missing. He hasn't forgotten me. He's preparing me. And the second thing on this point, again, emphasizing the point that God is not missing. Just because perhaps He's making you wait, it does not mean He is doing nothing. That's a really important point to make. The first is He's not missing, He's preparing you. But the second is He's not doing nothing. He's not doing nothing. In fact, He's probably saving you in other ways. He's probably saving you in other ways. My cousin told me a story recently about when he was back in Egypt. There was like a time, when they say when it rains, it pours. Pretty much that's what happened to their family. Their mum had just been diagnosed with cancer, and so she was really unwell, basically bedbound. His dad had just had a knee reconstruction, So he could barely help out around the house. And he himself, my cousin, had a hairline fracture in his hip. So it was like a crippled household. Like no one was moving, no one was doing anything. And then, just their luck, in Egypt, they see smoke coming out of the kitchen. And they see a fire coming out of the kitchen. And so my cousin, not thinking, just wanting to react immediately, gets up and starts running to the kitchen, and then he hears crack. His hairline fracture had become a complete break of his hip. And he fell to the ground in complete agony. All right? This was the state of the household. No one, everyone's bedbound. Now the one person that could do anything gets up and breaks his hip. And so he's on the ground screaming for help. And his dad gets up with his new knee and starts running towards him, limping towards him, and then runs straight past him. My cousin's on the ground, he's like, "Dad, come help. Like, he just ran straight past me." Dad runs into the kitchen, grabs a bucket and starts putting out the fire. But the fire was too big. So he starts running back. And my cousin's thinking, all right, now he's going to help me get up. And he runs straight past him again. It's like, "Dad, what are you doing?" And he runs out of the house. He's like, "Oh, we're stuffed. Dad's leaving us. We're going to die." If you know, in Egypt, the fire brigade is not coming. Like, that's just not going to happen. He runs to his neighbors and starts telling them about the fire. So everyone comes with a bucket. And again, all of these people run over my cousin, go into the kitchen and start putting out the fire. This whole time, he's screaming out for someone to help him. Everyone keeps running past him to put out the fire. And when he thinks about the story, I remember him saying to me, he's like, when I think about the story, I feel dumb. I feel silly. My dad wasn't trying to help me get out of my pain because he was trying to save my life. He was trying to do something much more important. And it's the same thing with me. Just because I can't see what God is doing doesn't mean he's doing nothing. It doesn't mean that he's ignorant to my pain. He doesn't mean that he can't see me on the ground with my broken hip, crying in agony, and he's just ignoring me. He's busy putting out another fire. He's trying to save me. Perhaps if I was not made to wait through my trials, I never would have developed the resilience to deal with future trials. I never would have developed the patience to wait on God's promises. Perhaps this is the way he's saving me, by refining me. In James chapter 1, verses 2-5, it says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." And in Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know that the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." God has a plan for me. Even though I'm hurting, even though I'm in pain, he's not ignorant to that. He's preparing me. He's refining me. He's saving me. He's doing things that I can't see. And that brings us to the end of Exodus chapter 2. Next week is the story of the burning bush. And like I said, that begins this incredible story that leads to the climactic moment when Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. They begin their journey towards the promised land. And so when we start that portion of the story, it's easy to forget Exodus chapters 1 and 2. It's easy to forget these minor characters. It's easy to forget all these things that set him up to do what he's about to accomplish. But what I urge you to do is read over these chapters again. Remember these minor characters that allowed Moses to be in the position that he was. Remember God's plan for salvation. That perhaps maybe he's making you wait on something. Maybe he's allowing you to suffer just a little bit longer. But his promise is there. He's with you while you wait. He's with you in that suffering. And he's not ignorant to your pain. He's saving you. He's preparing you. He's refining you. And glory be to God forevermore. Amen. Does anyone have any comments or questions or anything? Okay. Glory be to God forevermore. Amen.
Thank you very much, Marc. Such an insightful talk and a very reassuring talk as well. that God's always there, even though we might not know that He's working in our life. So to conclude tonight, we have a couple announcements for everyone. So the first announcement is St. Abraam's revival. Because it's his feast next week, we're celebrating with a 3-day revival. So the revival goes from Wednesday to Friday. And then on Wednesday, some pretty exciting news. We have a debate. So the debate is our church versus St. Mark's church. So St. Abraam will be debating against St. Mark's, and St. Abraam will win. Sorry, Marc. And the topic is God is just and fair. And as a consequence, there's punishment in our lives. So we'll be debating, it'll be fun. Come show support for both churches, but mainly St. Abraam. And then hopefully there'll be a winner on that night. And then following the debate, there'll also be Origin. So we'll be streaming the Origin. So you're not going to miss out on Origin if you guys are worried about that. In fact, it'll be a better experience for everyone. So come through, it'll be a good night. The Thursday, there's going to be Tazbeha, a talk, and then a liturgy to celebrate the feast. Liturgy finishes 11 o'clock, so I think the night starts at 7. Is that right, Andrew? Yeah, so 7 to 11. Everything's going to be in St. Abraham's church. And then Friday, we're going to have a youth meeting combined with another church. And Thursdays combined with St. Barb's. So it's going to be fun. And then Friday, you'll find out very soon. The Sunday, so the Monday is going to be a public holiday. The Sunday just before it, so Sunday the 12th. We're going to have an open day. So it celebrates the feast of Pentecost and St. Abraham. It's going to be a pretty big open day. It goes from 12 to 6 on the 12th of the 6th. So it'll be a pretty good day. So if everyone wants to come, it'll be a good, nice hangout. So bring your friends. In terms of ski trip, if anyone's still interested, you're more than welcome to come. There's still a few spots here and there. So it just depends on accommodation, males and females, obviously. So some people have to go on the waiting list, some people won't. Like males and females, I mean. So if you guys are interested, please let us know. Everyone's more than welcome to come. It's a good trip. It goes from the 5th to the 8th of August. What else? Cost is around $9.50, and that includes everything, or majority of the things. Is there anything else? Oh, okay. There's also the revival throughout the whole process. I think there's an Arabic revival. There's a lot to it, so there should be a poster in the emails or in the messages. So if you guys are interested or want to know more about it, please see one of the servants and we can send you that. Every Thursday night there's Tazbeha in the Arabic church, and that's from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. There's a boys' side and a girls' side, so you guys are more than welcome to join us. It's a very nice, it's like a youth Tazbeha. I think that's everything. Yeah? All right. Thank you, guys. If we please stand up for prayer. Thank you.